The Galactic Defense Station Omega-7 shook violently as another barrage of plasma bolts struck its shields. Admiral Zexhai of the Kethran Republic watched the tactical display with growing despair. Red warning lights bathed the command center in an ominous glow as system after system reported critical damage. "Shield strength down to 12%, shouted Lieutenant Commander Vorth from his station. The young Eltarian's blue skin had turned pale with fear. "The Drakari fleet is closing in for the final assault." Zexhai's forearms moved frantically across his. "The Drakari still have over 300 vessels. Their flagship alone is bigger than our entire remaining fleet." The Drakari Empire had swept across half the galaxy in just 2 years. Their technology was centuries ahead of everyone else. Their weapons could punch through any known armor. Their ships moved faster than anything the allied races could build. Most terrifying of all, they showed no mercy. Every world they conquered was stripped of resources and some were crying, sensing the fear of the adults around them. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was the end of everything they had fought to protect. "We will do everything in our power," Zexhai replied, though the words felt hollow. The truth was that they had maybe an hour before the Drakari broke through their defenses completely. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in heavy silence. Everyone knew they were looking at their final moments. The Alliance had tried everything: combined fleets, new technologies, desperate tactics. Nothing worked against the Drakari war machine. "Admiral," called out the sensor operator, "I'm detecting something strange on the long-range scanners. There's a small fleet approaching from the outer system. Configuration unknown. Drakari reinforcements?" Zexhai asked bitterly. "Negative, sir. The energy signatures don't match any known Drakari vessels. In fact, they don't match any ships in our database." This was puzzling. Every civilized species in the galaxy was either already part of the Alliance or had been conquered by the Drakari. Who could these newcomers be? "How many ships?" Zexhai inquired. 12 vessels, sir. They're much smaller than Drakari battleships, but they're moving at incredible speed. They'll reach the battlefield in 10 minutes. Zexhai considered this development. 12 ships couldn't possibly make a difference against the Drakari fleet. Even if these mysterious vessels were friendly, they would just be throwing their lives away in a hopeless cause. "Try to establish communication," he ordered. "Warn them about what they're flying into." The communications officer worked at her console for several minutes before shaking her head. "I can't get through, sir. They're using some kind of encryption we've never seen before." On the main display, the Drakari fleet continued its relentless advance. The massive enemy ships bristled with weapons that could vaporize a moon. Their commander, war leader Thax, had personally overseen the conquest of 47 star systems. He had never known defeat. "Sir, the unknown fleet is changing course," reported the sensor operator. "They're heading directly for the Drakari formation." "They're going to attack?" Commander THYSS asked in disbelief. 12 ships against 300? That's suicide. Zexhai watched the tactical display with fascination despite their dire situation. The unknown vessels were indeed tiny compared to the Drakari dreadnoughts. Yet they moved with a precision and coordination he had never seen before. They flew in perfect formation, adjusting their positions with split-second timing. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," announced the communications officer. "It's from the lead ship of the unknown fleet." "Put it through." The hologram that appeared showed a being unlike any Zexhai had ever seen. The creature stood upright on 2 legs like an Eltarian, but its skin was a pale pink color with no scales or natural armor. It had short brown fur only on the top of its head, and its eyes were a striking blue color. Most unusual of all, when it spoke, its mouth revealed flat white teeth instead of the sharp fangs most species possessed. "This is Captain Sarachin of the Terran Space Force destroyer Indomitable," the being said. "We've monitored your distress signals and are moving to assist." Terran? Zexhai had never heard of such a species. "Captain Chan, I appreciate your courage, but you're flying into certain death. The Drakari have 300 ships, and their technology is far superior to anything we've encountered." The human's face showed no fear, only grim determination. "Admiral, we've faced impossible odds before. Sometimes the key to victory isn't having the biggest ships or the most advanced weapons. Sometimes it's about being too stubborn to quit and too clever to fight fair." Captain, your 12 ships cannot possibly make a difference against that fleet, Zexai insisted. Save your people. Evacuate while you still can. Captain Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to look both reassuring and predatory at the same time. Admiral, you're about to learn something about humans. We don't know how to quit, and we sure as hell don't know how to run from a fight when innocent people are counting on us. The transmission ended, leaving Zexai staring at the now empty hologram. What kind of species would willingly charge into hopeless battle? What did they hope to accomplish? Sir, the Terran ships are entering weapons range, reported the tactical officer. The Drakari are focusing their fire on the newcomers. Zexai watched in amazement as the human vessels suddenly broke formation and scattered in all directions. Instead of flying in the predictable patterns that all civilized species used in space combat, they moved like wild things. They rolled, dove, and spun through space in maneuvers that should have been impossible for vessels their size. The Drakari opened fire with their massive plasma cannons, weapons that had destroyed countless fleets. But their shots passed harmlessly through empty space as the human ships danced between the energy beams with impossible agility. How are they moving like that? Whispered Commander THYSS. Those acceleration patterns should crush any living crew. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the Terran ships, called the sensor operator. They're charging some kind of weapons system. Suddenly, brilliant white beams lanced out from the human vessels. These weren't the typical plasma or particle beams that most species used. The energy signatures were completely unknown, and they moved at speeds that the sensors could barely track. The first Drakari ship to be hit simply vanished. One moment it was there, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons, and the next instant there was nothing but expanding debris. No explosion, no fire, just complete disintegration. Impossible, breathed Zexai. Those were destroyer-class ships. Nothing that small should be able to damage a Drakari dreadnought. But the humans weren't finished. Their 12 ships continued their wild dance through space, dodging the increasingly desperate Drakari fire. Every few seconds, those terrible white beams would lance out again, and another enemy vessel would simply cease to exist. Admiral, said the communications officer, her voice filled with awe, the Drakari are requesting reinforcements. They're calling for immediate support from their reserve fleet. For the first time in 2 years of war, Zexai heard something in a Drakari transmission that he had never heard before: fear. The species that had conquered half the galaxy was afraid. The human ships continued their assault, moving through the Drakari formation like deadly ghosts. They appeared where the enemy least expected, struck with devastating precision, and vanished again before return fire could find them. It was unlike any form of space combat Zexai had ever witnessed. Sir, the Drakari are trying to withdraw, reported the tactical officer. They're pulling back toward the jump point. Pursuing unknown vessels, came another report. The Terran ships are staying with them. Zexai watched in stunned silence as the force that had seemed unstoppable just minutes ago fled in disorder. The mighty Drakari Empire, conqueror of worlds, was running from 12 small ships crewed by beings no one had ever heard of. Admiral, said Captain Chen's voice over the comm system, we're going to chase down the retreating enemy vessels. Recommend you begin rescue operations for any survivors and prepare your defenses. This was just their advance force. Captain, wait, Zexai called out. Who are you? Where do your people come from? We're from a small world called Earth, on the edge of what you probably consider civilized space, Chen replied. We heard about the Drakari invasion through some refugees who made it to our system. Figured it was time to lend a hand. But, your technology, your fighting methods, they're unlike anything we've ever seen. There was a pause before Chen responded, and, when she did, Zexai thought he could hear something like sadness in her voice. Admiral, you species have known peace for so long that you've forgotten how to make war. Humans are different. We've been fighting each other for our entire history. We know every dirty trick, every brutal strategy, every way to turn weakness into strength. The Drakari are about to learn that there's a big difference between conquering peaceful civilizations and facing a species that was born for war. The transmission ended, and Zexai stared at the tactical display as the human ships disappeared into hyperspace, chasing the retreating Drakari fleet. In the span of 20 minutes, everything had changed. The hopeless battle had become something else entirely. Admiral, said Commander THYSS quietly, what have we just witnessed? Zexai wasn't sure he had an answer. All he knew was that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that made the fearsome Drakari Empire turn and run. A species that fought not with overwhelming technology or superior numbers, but with something else entirely. I think, Zexai said slowly, we've just met humanity. And, I have a feeling the galaxy is about to change forever. 3 days after the shocking retreat of the Drakari fleet, Admiral Zexai found himself aboard the human command ship Indomitable. The vessel was unlike anything in his experience. Where other species built their ships to impress or intimidate, human vessels seemed designed purely for function. Every surface served a purpose, every component was built to withstand punishment. Captain Sarah Chen met him in what she called the briefing room. The space was cramped by galactic standards, with no decorative elements or ceremonial features. Charts and tactical displays covered every wall, showing star maps marked with hostile positions and strategic assessments. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Admiral, Chen said, gesturing to a chair that had been hastily modified to accommodate his four-armed physique. We need to talk about what's coming. Zexai studied the human female carefully. She was smaller than most sapient species he knew, standing barely taller than his shoulder. Yet there was something about her presence that commanded attention. Her movements were precise and economical, like a predator conserving energy. Captain Chen, my people are still struggling to understand what happened 3 days ago, Zexai admitted. Your ships destroyed 37 Drakari vessels without losing a single craft. In 2 years of war, our combined fleets never managed to destroy more than 3 or 4 enemy ships in any single engagement. Chen nodded grimly. The Drakari made a mistake that many powerful civilizations make. They assumed that advanced technology and overwhelming force would always triumph. They never considered that their enemies might adapt, might find new ways to fight. But, your weapons, your ship's maneuverability, this technology is far beyond what any of our races have achieved. Actually, no, Shin said, surprising him. Our weapons are based on principles your scientists discovered centuries ago. Our ships use engines that are less efficient than yours in many ways. The difference isn't our technology, Admiral. The difference is how we think about war. She activated a holographic display showing the recent battle. Zexai watched as the engagement played out again, seeing the human ships move in their impossible patterns. Your people fight like civilized beings, Chen explained. You follow established protocols, use predictable formations, and rely on superior firepower to win battles. That works fine against enemies who think the same way. But we humans learned long ago that the only rule in war is that there are no rules. The display showed a human destroyer executing a maneuver that should have torn the ship apart, rolling through a spiral dive while firing at 2 different targets simultaneously. Our pilots train in gravity wells, in asteroid fields, in solar storms, Chen continued. We practice flying damaged ships with half their systems offline. We learn to fight when we're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Because on Earth, that's usually the situation we find ourselves in. Earth must be a very dangerous world, Zexai observed. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. Dangerous? Admiral, our home planet has tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, ice ages, asteroid impacts, deadly diseases. Earth has thrown everything it has at humanity. And, we're still here because we learned to be more stubborn than a planet. She called up another display, showing what appeared to be Earth's surface. Zexai gasped at what he saw. The world was a chaotic mix of climates and terrains, with massive storms swirling across its surface and tectonic activity that would make most planets uninhabitable. We evolved from pack hunters on a world where everything wanted to eat us, Chen said matter-of-factly. We learned to work together, to think strategically, and to never give up. When we couldn't outrun our predators, we became smarter. When we couldn't fight them alone, we learned to coordinate our attacks. When we couldn't match their natural weapons, we made our own. Your species sounds formidable. We're survivors, Admiral. And now we're here because we won't stand by and watch the Drakari exterminate peaceful civilizations. The door to the briefing room opened, and another human entered. This one was male, taller and broader than Chen, with scars marking his face and arms. He moved with the careful gait of someone who had been injured many times and learned to compensate. Admiral, this is Colonel Marcus Rivera, commander of our ground forces, Chen said by way of introduction. Rivera nodded respectfully. Admiral, we've been studying Drakari occupation tactics on the worlds they've conquered. We have some ideas about how to take the fight to them. Ground forces? HFY was confused. Space combat is where the Drakari are vulnerable. Their orbital superiority has made ground resistance impossible on every conquered world. Rivera smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. That's because no one has tried human-style ground warfare against them. The Drakari are used to fighting civilized armies in open battle. They're not prepared for guerrilla warfare. I don't understand this term. Guerrilla warfare is what happens when a smaller, weaker force refuses to fight by the rules, Rivera explained. Instead of meeting the enemy in direct battle, you hit them where they're weak, when they're not expecting it, and then disappear before they can respond. You make them afraid to leave their bases. You turn their overwhelming numbers against them by making every supply convoy a potential ambush, every communication relay a target. Chen activated another holographic display, showing a tactical assessment of Drakari ground operations. Our intelligence indicates that the Drakari rely heavily on centralized command and control. They maintain order through fear and superior firepower, but their forces are spread thin across their conquered territories. We can't liberate entire worlds overnight, Rivera added, but we can make their occupation so costly that they'll be forced to divert resources from their main offensive. Every Drakari soldier pinned down hunting guerrilla fighters is a soldier they can't use for new conquests. HFY studied the two humans, trying to understand their mindset. You speak of warfare as if it's something you understand completely. Most civilized species view it as a last resort, a tragic necessity when diplomacy fails. Admiral, Chen said quietly, humanity has been at war with something or someone for our entire existence. We've fought our environment, our predators, and, unfortunately, each other. We've learned that sometimes violence isn't just a last resort, it's the only language that tyrants understand. But, surely your people prefer peace? Of course we do, Rivera replied. Every human soldier dreams of a world where our skills are never needed. But, until that day comes, we'll use everything we've learned about war to protect those who can't protect themselves. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. Captain, we're receiving multiple distress signals from the Vega system. The Drakari have returned with a larger fleet. Shen stood immediately, her demeanor shifting to combat readiness. Admiral, would you like to see how humans fight when the odds are even worse? Within an hour, the human fleet had jumped to the Vega system. What they found there was a nightmare. The Drakari had returned with over 500 ships, nearly twice the size of their previous force. They were systematically bombarding the planet's surface, targeting refugee camps and civilian shelters with calculated cruelty. This is War Leader Thax of the Drakari Empire, came a transmission broadcast on all frequencies. To the unknown vessels that attacked our forces 3 days ago, you have interfered with the rightful conquest of inferior species. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Continue to resist, and we will make you watch as we eliminate every living being on this world. HFY felt his heart sink. The human fleet numbered only 18 ships now, having been reinforced by 6 additional vessels that had arrived from Earth. Against 500 Drakari ships, the battle seemed hopeless. Captain Chen, he said urgently, you must retreat. Your people have done enough. Don't throw away your lives in a hopeless gesture. Chen was studying the tactical display with intense concentration. Colonel, how long would you need to get your teams planetside? Give us 20 minutes and we can have infiltration teams in position, Rivera replied. But, Captain, we'll need those Drakari ships to be distracted for at least 6 hours. Distracted? HFY couldn't believe what he was hearing. There are 500 enemy vessels out there. Chen turned to him, and he saw something in her eyes that he was beginning to recognize as a uniquely human expression, the look of someone who had decided that impossible odds were just another problem to solve. Admiral, let me ask you something. In all your studies of military history, have you ever heard of the Battle of Thermopylae? No. 300 Spartan warriors held off an army of hundreds of thousands for 3 days. At the Battle of Rorke's Drift, 150 British soldiers fought off 4,000 Zulu warriors. At the Siege of Bastogne, surrounded American forces told the Germans demanding surrender to go to hell. But, those were different circumstances. No, Admiral, they were exactly the same circumstances, Chen interrupted. Brave people facing impossible odds because someone had to make a stand. The only difference is that this time, those brave people have spacecraft. She activated the ship's intercom system. All vessels, this is Captain Chen. We have 500 Drakari ships between us and 3 billion innocent civilians. I know the math looks bad, but remember, we're human. Since when have we ever let math stop us from doing what's right? The responses that came back over the comm system sent chills down Zexai's spine. Ship after ship reported ready for battle, their captains and crews showing no fear, only grim determination. Besides, Chen added with that predatory smile, they're expecting us to fight like civilized beings. Time to show them what uncivilized warfare looks like. As the human fleet accelerated toward the massive Drakari force, Zexai realized he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just a battle, but a demonstration of what happened when an unstoppable force met beings who simply refused to be moved. The Battle of Vega began unlike any space engagement in recorded galactic history. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, the 18 human ships scattered across the solar system like a pack of wolves preparing to hunt. Admiral Zexai watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as Captain Chen coordinated what appeared to be complete chaos. Phoenix Wing, take position behind the gas giant's third moon. Shadow Squadron, use the asteroid field for cover. Hammer Group, I want you skimming the star's corona, Chen commanded with calm precision. Captain, Zexai said urgently, you're dividing your forces. Basic military doctrine says you should concentrate your firepower against the enemy's weakest point. Chen didn't look away from her tactical display. Admiral, basic military doctrine assumes you're fighting an enemy with roughly equal capabilities. When you're outnumbered 30-1, traditional doctrine will get you killed. We're not here to fight their strengths, we're here to exploit their weaknesses. On the main screen, the massive Drakari fleet began moving into attack formation. Their ships were enormous, each dreadnought carrying enough firepower to level a continent. War leader Thax had arranged his vessels in the classic Drakari formation, a hammer-shaped wedge designed to crush enemy resistance through overwhelming force. All human vessels, initiate Protocol Omega, Chen ordered. Suddenly, every human ship in the system began broadcasting false signals. Electronic warfare arrays that had been hidden within their hulls activated, creating dozens of phantom contacts on Drakari sensors. To the enemy fleet, it appeared as if they were facing not 18 ships, but nearly 200. Impossible, breathed Zexai. How are you generating so many false contacts? Humans learned long ago that half of winning a battle is making your enemy think you're stronger than you are, Chen replied. The other half is being in the last place they expect to find you. The Drakari fleet began targeting the phantom signals, firing massive volleys of plasma into empty space. While they wasted ammunition on ghosts, the real human ships began their attack. But, instead of the frontal assault that every military mind in the galaxy would expect, they struck at the Drakari supply lines. Captain Lisa Park of the destroyer Relentless had positioned her ship in the shadow of an ice moon, completely powered down and invisible to sensors. When a Drakari ammunition transport passed nearby, she struck like a viper. The transport, unescorted and unsuspecting, was vaporized before it could even send a distress signal. First blood to the Relentless, came Park's voice over the comm ammunition transport destroyed. Moving to secondary target. Across the system, similar ambushes were taking place. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids, planetary rings, and solar radiation clouds to strike at fuel depots, communication relays, and supply ships. Each attack lasted only seconds before the attackers vanished again into the cosmic shadows. This is impossible, War Leader Thax's voice crackled over intercepted Drakari communications. How can such a small force be attacking us simultaneously from so many positions? Sir, we've lost contact with 17 supply vessels and, for communication nodes, came a response from one of his subordinates. Our sensor arrays show enemy contacts throughout the system, but every time we move to engage them, they disappear. Zexai was beginning to understand the human strategy. You're not trying to destroy their main fleet at all. You're attacking their ability to sustain a prolonged engagement. Exactly, Chen confirmed. The Drakari brought overwhelming force, but that force requires massive logistical support. Without ammunition, fuel, and communications, even the most powerful fleet becomes a collection of floating metal. Meanwhile, Colonel Rivera and his ground teams had been busy with their own mission. Using stealth shuttles that flew through the planet's radiation belt to mask their approach, they had landed on the surface of Vega Prime. Their target wasn't the Drakari ground forces, it was something much more valuable. Infiltration Team Alpha to Fleet Command, Rivera's voice came through the comm system. We've located the Drakari command bunker. It's heavily defended, but we've found a weakness. What's the situation down there, Colonel? Chen asked. The Drakari built their command center in the ruins of the planet's old capital city. They're using the local population as human shields, thinking that will prevent any attack. They don't understand that humans have experience fighting in urban environments. Rivera and his team had spent hours moving through the rubble-strewn streets, using techniques developed in countless human conflicts. They moved through sewers, abandoned buildings, and underground tunnels, getting closer to their target with each passing hour. The Drakari guards are posted at obvious positions, main roads, building entrances, vehicle checkpoints, Rivera reported. But they've never dealt with an enemy that can climb walls, pick locks, and move through spaces too small for their bulky armor. Up in space, the battle was intensifying. The Drakari had finally stopped chasing phantom signals and were beginning to coordinate their search for the human ships. War leader Thax was proving to be a cunning opponent, dividing his fleet into smaller hunting groups to cover more territory. "Captain, we have a problem," announced Commander Johnson from the destroyer Yorktown. "Drakari hunting groups are closing in on our positions. They're starting to figure out our pattern." "Time to change the game," Shen said. "All ships, initiate Protocol Zulu. It's time to show them what happens when humans get angry." What happened next defied everything Zexai thought he knew about space combat. Instead of running from the approaching Drakari hunters, the human ships turned and charged directly toward them. But they didn't attack the way any sane military force would attack. The destroyer Fierce charged straight at a Drakari heavy cruiser, firing its main guns in a pattern that seemed random and wasteful. The Drakari ship returned fire with its superior weapons, confident of an easy kill. At the last possible second, the Fierce executed an impossible maneuver, rolling beneath the enemy vessel while simultaneously firing grappling charges. "What are they doing?" Zexai gasped as he watched the human ship attach itself to the underside of the Drakari cruiser. "Something we learned from our naval ancestors," Chen replied grimly. "When you can't outfight the enemy ship-to-ship, you board them." Explosive charges detonated along the Drakari hull, creating breaches that human boarding parties poured through. Within minutes, the enemy vessel's communications went dead, followed by secondary explosions as the humans sabotaged critical systems from within. Across the system, other human ships were employing equally unconventional tactics. The destroyer Phoenix used its engines to superheat a cloud of metallic debris, creating a makeshift shotgun blast that shredded the armor of 3 Drakari frigates. The hammer used the gravity well of the gas giant to slingshot itself into an impossible attack angle, appearing directly above a Drakari dreadnought before anyone could react. "This is madness," Zexai muttered, watching the impossible battle unfold. "No," Chen corrected, "this is desperation. And humans are at their most dangerous when they're desperate." On the planet's surface, Colonel Rivera's team had reached their objective. The Drakari command bunker was a fortress built into the bedrock, protected by energy shields and automated defenses. Any conventional assault would have been suicide. "Alpha Team to Fleet Command," Rivera reported. "We're in position, but there's something you need to know. The Drakari aren't just using the civilians as shields, they're planning to execute them. Mass executions are scheduled to begin in 1 hour as a demonstration to the human fleet." The comm channel fell silent for a moment as the implications sank in. Then, Chen's voice came back, hard as steel. "Colonel, what do you need?" 30 minutes of absolute chaos up there. If the Drakari are too busy fighting for their lives in space, they won't be watching their back door. You'll have it. All ships, new priority target, make war leader Thax so angry he forgets everything else. What followed was 30 minutes of the most audacious space combat ever witnessed. Human ships deliberately exposed themselves to Drakari fire, taunting the enemy fleet into reckless pursuit. They led the massive Drakari vessels on wild chases through asteroid fields and solar prominences, causing the enemy to suffer heavy damage from environmental hazards. Captain Torres of the destroyer Defiant performed a maneuver that would be studied in military academies for generations. He flew his ship directly into the corona of the system's star, using the intense radiation to mask his approach. When a Drakari dreadnought followed, confident in its superior shielding, Torres waited until the enemy was committed to the chase before detonating his ship's entire supply of antimatter torpedoes at point-blank range. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Both ships were vaporized instantly, but the psychological impact on the Drakari was devastating. They had just watched a human deliberately sacrifice his ship and crew to take down a vessel 10 times its size. These beings are insane. War Leader Thax roared over the calm. They fight like wild animals. Sir, we're receiving reports from the surface, came a subordinate's panicked voice. The command bunker is under attack. Human forces have somehow penetrated our defenses. On Vega Prime, Colonel Rivera and his team had proven that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. While the Drakari watched the skies for threats, the humans had approached through the planet's old mining tunnels. They struck the bunker from below, emerging directly inside the enemy's most secure facility. The battle that followed was brutal and decisive. Drakari warriors, bred for space combat and planetary conquest, found themselves fighting humans in close-quarters combat. It was a fight they were not prepared for. Target secured, Rivera reported as the sound of gunfire echoed in the background. All civilian hostages are safe, and we've captured their communication codes. Admiral HFY, you might want to listen to this. A new voice came over the comm system, War Leader Thax, but speaking from the captured bunker rather than his flagship. To all Drakari forces, this is your commander. The humans they have taken our primary command center. They're demanding we withdraw from this system immediately. Sir, came confused responses from the Drakari fleet. You don't understand, Thax's voice was filled with something none of them had ever heard before: fear. These humans, they don't fight like any species we've ever encountered. They don't care about their own lives. They don't follow any civilized rules of war. They're willing to sacrifice everything to protect beings they've never even met. There was a pause before the war leader continued, his voice breaking. They're not just warriors. There's something else entirely. Something we were never prepared to face. The interrogation room aboard the Indomitable was spartanly furnished, containing only a metal table and 2 chairs. War Leader Thax sat rigidly in restraints designed for his massive frame, his reptilian features betraying none of the confusion that Admiral HFY could sense beneath the surface. Captain Chen sat across from him, her small human form dwarfed by the Drakari commander, yet somehow she dominated the space. Your fleet has withdrawn from the Vega system, Chen stated matter-of-factly. Your ground forces have surrendered. You're 6 months after the Battle of Vega, Admiral HFY stood in the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council on Centauri Prime. Representatives from over 200 species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a symphony of different languages and tones. Today marked the formal signing of the Treaty of Terra Nova, the agreement that would officially end the Drakari Empire's reign of terror. At the center of the hall, a simple human woman in a blue uniform stood before microphones that would carry her words to billions of beings across the galaxy. Captain Sarah Chen looked remarkably ordinary for someone who had single-handedly changed the course of galactic history. Honored delegates, Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 6 months ago, most of you had never heard of humanity. We were just another species on the edge of civilized space, dealing with our own problems and minding our own business. HFY noticed how Chen's words were simultaneously humble and confident. She wasn't boasting about human achievements, but she wasn't downplaying them either. We came to Vega not because we wanted to fight a war, but because we couldn't stand by and watch innocent beings suffer when we had the power to help. What followed taught all of us some important lessons about the nature of strength and the price of peace. The Drakari delegation sat in stony silence at their designated table. War Leader Thax, now bearing the new title of Peace Negotiator, kept his eyes fixed on Chen. The weeks of negotiation had transformed him from a conqueror into something else entirely, a being who understood that true strength sometimes meant admitting weakness. The Drakari Empire, Chen continued, built their civilization on the belief that might makes right. For centuries, this philosophy served them well. They conquered hundreds of worlds, enslaved countless populations, and became the dominant force in this galaxy. They were successful because they faced enemies who fought by the same rules they did. She paused, looking around the assembly hall at the gathered representatives. But humans learned long ago that rules are just agreements. When someone breaks those agreements and threatens the innocent, you don't defeat them by playing by their rules. You change the rules entirely. In the observers' gallery, Colonel Rivera sat with other human military officers. His scarred face showed satisfaction as he watched Chen articulate the principles they had all fought for. Next to him sat Captain Torres, who had somehow survived the destruction of his ship at Vega through a combination of luck and the human talent for refusing to die when death seemed certain. The war that followed, Chen said, wasn't won through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It was won through superior understanding of what war actually costs. The Drakari understood the price of victory, but they never considered the price of occupation. They knew how to conquer, but they never learned how to rule. This was the key insight that had broken the Drakari Empire. Every world they held required constant military presence. Every act of oppression created new resistance fighters. Every security measure reduced economic efficiency. Within months of human interference, the empire was spending more resources maintaining control than it was gaining from conquest. Today's treaty, Chen announced, establishes new principles for galactic civilization. First, no species has the right to impose its will on others through force. Second, disputes between civilizations will be resolved through negotiation and arbitration, not warfare. Third, any species that violates these principles will face the united opposition of all others. The assembly erupted in cheers from most delegations, though some remained notably silent. The Corvallian hegemony and the Zentori corporate collective had built their own power through conquest and economic domination. They were undoubtedly wondering if humanity might next turn its attention to their activities. Chen raised her hand for quiet. But this treaty isn't just about preventing future wars. It's about building a galaxy where every species can thrive according to its own nature and values. The Drakari people have incredible talents for organization and logistics. In peacetime, these skills can benefit everyone. She gestured toward the Drakari delegation. Peace negotiator Thax has agreed to lead a new Drakari government focused on trade and cooperation rather than conquest. Their military will be restructured into a peacekeeping force, working alongside human advisors to protect neutral worlds from piracy and aggression. This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire agreement. Instead of dismantling Drakari civilization entirely, the humans had found a way to redirect their strengths toward constructive purposes. Former Drakari warships were being converted into cargo vessels and exploration craft. Military bases were becoming trade stations and research facilities. Zexhai reflected on how completely the humans had outmaneuvered everyone. They had turned their greatest enemy into an ally, transformed a threat into an asset. It was the kind of strategic thinking that had made humanity so effective in their brief but decisive war. The treaty also establishes the Terran Defense Initiative, Chen announced. Human military advisors will be available to any species that requests assistance in developing defensive capabilities. We will share our knowledge of asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and unconventional strategy with anyone facing aggression. This sent murmurs through the assembly. The humans weren't just offering to fight for others, they were offering to teach others to fight for themselves. It was a generous gesture that also served their interests perfectly. A galaxy full of species capable of effective resistance would make future conquest nearly impossible. However, Chen continued, her tone becoming more serious, this knowledge comes with responsibilities. Any species that uses human military training for aggressive purposes will find themselves facing the same opposition that brought down the Drakari Empire. The warning was politely worded but unmistakable. Humanity was establishing itself as the galaxy's policeman, but with clearly defined rules of engagement. They would help victims but punish aggressors, regardless of size or power. In the Drakari section, Thax rose to address the assembly. His massive frame dominated the podium, but his words were those of a being who had learned humility through bitter experience. The Drakari Empire acknowledges the crimes committed against peaceful civilizations, he began, his voice carrying across the hall without amplification. We accept full responsibility for the suffering we have caused, and we commit ourselves to making amends. He paused, seeming to struggle with emotions unfamiliar to his warrior culture. Captain Chen and her people taught us something our species had forgotten in our pursuit of conquest. True strength isn't measured by how much you can take, but by how much you're willing to give. The humans could have destroyed us completely. Instead, they offered us redemption. The formal signing ceremony that followed was unlike any in galactic history. Representatives from species that had been enemies for millennia sat side by side, united by their shared experience of facing extinction and being saved by beings they had never expected to care. As each delegate signed the treaty, they also signed individual agreements with the Terran government. Some requested military advisors. Others wanted trade partnerships. A few asked for help establishing new colonies in regions previously controlled by the Drakari. When it was Zexai's turn to sign for the Kethran Republic, he found himself face to face with Chen once again. "Captain," he said quietly, "I must ask you something that has troubled me for months. Your people could rule this galaxy if you chose to. You have the military capability and the strategic thinking. Why are you giving others the tools to resist you instead?" Chen smiled, the same expression that had once seemed predatory but now appeared genuinely warm. "Admiral, that's exactly why we can't rule the galaxy. The moment we start thinking of ourselves as rulers instead of protectors, we become just another empire waiting for someone stronger to come along. Power corrupts, but shared power strengthens everyone." She gestured toward the assembly hall, where hundreds of species were working together for the first time in galactic history. Besides, humans learned something important from our own history. The best way to stay safe isn't to make everyone else weak. It's to make everyone strong enough to defend themselves. A galaxy full of independent, capable civilizations is much more stable than an empire built on subjugation. The ceremony concluded with the establishment of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, a joint military organization commanded by human officers but staffed by volunteers from all member species. Its mission was simple: protect the innocent and prevent any single power from dominating others. As the delegates began to disperse, Zexai noticed something remarkable. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now discussing joint ventures and cultural exchanges. The Altarians were sharing sensor technology with the THYSS. The Zentauri were offering medical expertise to former Drakari colonies. Even the most isolationist species were cautiously opening diplomatic channels. Humanity had accomplished something unprecedented. They had used military victory not to establish dominance, but to create cooperation. They had turned their enemies into allies and their allies into partners. 3 months later, Zexai received a personal invitation to visit Earth. As his ship approached the human homeworld, he finally understood where their unique perspective came from. Earth was indeed a death world, with massive storms, geological instability, and environmental extremes that would kill most galactic species within hours. But it was also beautiful. Vast oceans reflected sunlight in patterns that changed with each passing moment. Continents showed every shade of green and brown and gold. Weather systems created displays that no artificial civilization could match. "It's dangerous and magnificent at the same time," Captain Chen explained as they stood in the observation deck of the orbital station. "That's what made us who we are. We learned to see beauty in struggle, to find hope in impossible situations." "And you brought those lessons to the galaxy," Zexai observed. "We shared them with the galaxy," Chen corrected. "Every species has its own strengths, its own wisdom. We just happened to be good at the kind of problems the galaxy was facing." As Zexai watched the Earth turn below them, he realized that humanity had given the galaxy something more valuable than military protection or technological advancement. They had given it hope. They had proven that evil could be defeated, that the strong could choose to protect the weak, and that even the most hopeless situation could be transformed through courage and determination. The galaxy would never be the same. Where once there had been fear of conquest and domination, now there was confidence that aggression would be met with united resistance. Where once there had been isolation and mistrust, now there was cooperation and shared purpose. And, at the center of it all were the humans, the small species from the edge of space who had refused to let impossible odds stop them from doing what was right. They had kept their promise to make the galaxy safe for everyone, not through conquest, but through the simple revolutionary idea that might should serve right, not the other way around. The victory that had once looked impossible was now complete. But, more importantly, it had created the foundation for a peace that might last forever.